about that for a little while now. And to introduce the way my brain, as a student in literature for about 2 decades, and I did not expect that when I started counting, but I started my literature scholarship in 2000. So yeah, almost 2 decades. I'm that old. And how my brain as a student in literature, and I was in classic literature, Latin and Greek. So, okay, there's nothing more Western than that. So I had to adjust to the corpus I was about to work. And I was about to work on that corpus just because I was really interested in. I wanted to know. And, but how my brain had to adjust, I'm just going to do a little comparison with the first time I went on the land in Ivujivik. So for me, I was invited to a fishing trip, maybe about 15 kilometers from the community, and I felt like I was the biggest explorer of any time. I felt like I was on that biggest expedition of my life, and I was a big event, extraordinary, anything. Superlatives, you can use any of them. And I learned 2 things. I learned the first one is that I was the only one to feel like that. All the other, who were all Inuit, were just on a regular fishing trip that they've been going for many, many years. Oops. Can I open the door? So that's the first thing I realized. The second one is that the more I was looking to the land around me, I was just seeing white, snow, ice, and then that contrast with the sky, the blue sky. And that's all I was seeing, except here and there some rocks here and there, a few of them. So I was like, okay, they know exactly where we're going, and how do they know that? Because I was new, it was my first time. I've been in Ivujivik for 2 weeks maybe. And so I asked. And because Alona, we ask a lot of questions, and I learned that we ask too much questions. So anyway, I asked anyway, how do you know where we're going? Because for me, it seems like everything was the same. And in maybe 1 minute, I had a list of 10 details that people could see to navigate on those lands. And that's the second thing I learned, is that I would never see, or maybe, I don't know, at that time I knew that I would never see the land the way those Inuit were seeing it. Never, because I've never been enough on the land. I've never been educated for that. I've never been taught about that. And it really, and I realized that anything I would write, because I like to write on my own in my journal, anything I would write on that land would never match what Inuit are going to say about that land. So that little U-turn I did, it was for me a revelation on, okay, I want to study those texts, written texts, and I have to adapt. I mean, I have to see how am I going to study them in a way that would be the most ethical. I mean, the most ethical way. Okay, removing my filters, removing any stereotype I had, all of those criteria I had in me for many years, and that was not easy. But also because the institution of being a PhD student is always also upon you. Although I had my director was very open to all of what I was proposing, that didn't mean that the other part, the department and other teachers were open to all of those new texts and new form of text. So all of that together took a long time, and I'm sure I can still work on that even today after so many years. And drink a little bit. because talking loud is taking more energy. So, to quote an Inuk, Norma Dunning, she calls herself her urban Inuk, she said that Inuit peoples do not read and write and ingest culture the way non-Inuit Canadians do. So it's exactly what I've been trying to tell you just before. Of course, I'm just going to quickly remind you that in Nunavik and in other Inuit regions, the Inuit literary story started with oral literature. And to illustrate that, I have a beautiful picture of CIA I took from Ivujivik. And on that picture, she's actually teaching, maybe it was 2 years ago, she was teaching our students in a tent that we set up in the community center. And I've never seen the kids that absorb. Okay? We never had that, full listening student in a regular second language classroom. And it was amazing to see. So here, she's doing storytelling, as Inuit did, and we've been talking about it over and over, but we still have to remind ourselves that it started with just exchanging stories and talking about things that happen. And then we have a few group of texts that are known all over the Inuit region. So we have the Unikat, who be the stories, and then we have the Unikatuat, who are the legends, and then we have the songs, who are a very big part of the corpus of oral literature. And those songs themselves come in various types, and they have a variety of purposes. If written literature initiated by the intervention of missionaries at the first, it's really when the government of Canada and the government of Quebec, because I'm talking about Nunavik, began to administer Nunavik in the 50s and the 60s, and they opened schools in the region. The Inuit became more and more familiar with the practice of writing. At that time, a few magazines were circulating in the north, but the written Inuit literature is still little known today. I was surprised to hear Pitsiolak saying that it's been a few weeks that he learned that there's actually a lot of texts that were published in the 70s, for example. But it's true that there was a lot of writers trying to take their place and starting to publish some text here and there. And a reason why we haven't heard much about that literature is because of the form it's coming. It's actually in all sorts of magazines, all sorts of how can I say that? Books with few texts in there, anthologies, and then it's some texts that we can find only in archives, or we can find only with some academics that had them and then still hold on them for not necessarily bad reasons, but for all sorts of reasons. Okay? And but if we look at those texts, what the first thing I had to do was trying to see them, because of course, and I've heard about that, where are the books? Books, okay? And I came to start to be annoyed about that when I saw my bibliography, it's okay in English, that's the way, getting longer and longer and going on few pages. But it's true, I had only a few books. But does that mean Inuit literature did not exist? Is it because I can have a pile of books or a library behind me that it doesn't exist? And I understand that books are going to put those writers on the front, but we still have to recognize that it exists in another form. So I had to do that first. I had to accept the fact that I will have to defend the fact that I'm going to study the articles in all sorts of journals in the press. I'm going to have to explain why I decided to include spoken word. I'm going to have to explain why I'm including the blogs or even some big text published on Facebook about Inuit history. And then I'm going to have to explain why I'm going to write a big part of it on songs, songwriting, contemporary songwriting that was very popular since the 1970s. So all of that was, I had no choice to define in another way what I decided to be literature. So it was easier to call it writings, because that's what it was. But it did not mean that those texts had less power or less importance. And I included also some speeches. Leaders giving speeches, as Charlie Watt did in 1978 in front of the Parliament in Canada. He did his speech in Inuktitut, maybe for 20 minutes, and then he switched to English after. And that speech was published in one of the, probably at that time, Takralit magazine. And those texts, I had to include them because they are a part of that history that started in 1959 with Inuktitut magazine and then continued in all sorts of forms, as I said. So you have covers of books, but the covers of books are very, very recent. All of them are from maybe 2010 and after. But then you have the Inuktitut magazine started in 1959. Although it was funded by the government, still we had a lot of Inuit writing in there. We had an Inuit editor working on those in this magazine. What's interesting too with the Nunavik literature is that because of the fact that Nunavik is, how can I say, is a part of Quebec, not on the choice, but it is. It's written in 3 languages. So I know French is very, very little represented, but still, we have few texts which were first written in French. But the proportion of texts that come to us, so when I say text that comes to us, that means text that with a little bit of research we can find or we can have, we can read or on internet, in libraries, or now in the books. But the language of that literature is mainly, the language of publication anyway, is mainly English for maybe 50, 60%. And then we have 40% of Inuktitut and then maybe 10% in French. Some of those 10% are translation. And at the time I finished my research in 2014, the Inuktitut part was only 30%. But then I recalculated last year, before I finished my book, and it's now actually 40%. So that's that in the last few years, there is so many texts that were written in Inuktitut that my calculation jump. And that is coming from the songs. A lot of songs are now written in Inuktitut. There's a real revitalization of the language through songwriting. And it's very interesting to see. So we have, I don't remember which one. Oh, yeah. So we have the text, and we have the others. 95 of them. Some of them have written a lot. I decided just to put the picture without the name, just to have, I don't know, a feeling. Some of them I've written a lot, extensive text. Some of them I've written 1 or 2 texts. And I included them anyway, because who was I to decide who has to be there? And working on those texts, every time I found a text, I ended up seeing it as a treasure, because I felt like there was so little known, and they were sometimes so hard to find that there was no point for me to try to find which one would be the canon, as we said in French. And each of them were actually bringing something to that history. So I began to include all of them. But of course, some of them who had more impact and were more important for Inuit had more of my attention, and I decided to analyze them a little bit further than others. But they're still all together, they were bringing understanding of how this history, this literature developed over those 50 years until today. And I have never really discussed that in a conference, but it started to be a question very important for me. And it's at first I thought it was a technicality, but it's not that easy. Who is a Nunavik writer? When I started my research, I had to answer that question. And at first I was thinking, well, it's someone who's from Nunavik and who wrote a text. But it was not that easy, because then it was like, who is from Nunavik? So I had to, because at the beginning of my research, I was not living in Nunavik yet, and I didn't know much about family connection, community links, and then even the history of the communities. And a lot of things were new to me. And then I started to make sense of all of that, and I started to understand that it's not that simple, and I have to go back to my definition, which made me including, for example, I'm going to just take one example that is very significant, and it's William Taguna, who's a singer, but also a very well-known radio host in Nunavik for many, many years. And he's originally from Nunavut, but he moved in Kuujjuaq maybe in his 30s. He had all of his kids in Nunavik, and he's been living there since then. He used the dialect of Nunavik, and for any person I would ask in Ivujivik, he is a Nunavik. So I included him. And I end up many years after asking him, is that okay? Because I know you are from Nunavut, but for a lot of people, you're the voice of Nunavik. Everybody knows your voice, and everybody knows your songs. And he said, yeah, I'm Kuujjuaq. So that makes me jump to my second connections, the community, the sense of community. We could almost write a cultural history for each community in Nunavik. And because it's all, even though everything is connected by one history, that one history is made by micro history that connect together, but still, I know that in Ivujivik, people are very protective of the dialect, for example, of many traditions or some songs or some way of sewing. You have a way of sewing from Huartak, and you have a way of sewing in Inuktitut, and that would be different. I will not see it, but they will see it. Okay? So the community was very important, and that goes to another case, which was, I'm sorry, where am I? I said I'm going to say only one example, but yeah. John Amarualek, Maybe you've heard of him. He's known as the father of the Nunavik because he endlessly worked for the land claims of Nunavut. But he was born in Inuktitut. And I know that in Inuktitut, in the community of Inuktitut, is recognized as one of them. Although he has been in Nunavut for a long time because he was forced to go there with his family in 1950s because the government sent a bunch of family from Inuktitut in the high Arctic up there where there was nobody and no animals. So it's another example of how community work. So we work on one direction for William Taguna, and then it's going to work also on the other direction for John. And communities is at the root of all of those writings all the time up to today. Because I myself saw a few days ago students of my school, they were participating to a songwriting workshop with that lady up here. She's standing, she's Moa. So they were asked, okay, she was gonna teach them how to write a rap song. So she explained them the structure, and then she asked them, what do you want to work on? What do you want to write on? And almost all of them, that was the second group, but the first group said, Ivujivik. We want to write about our community. And I asked after the lady, was it like that in the other community you just come from? She said, yeah. So because I thought I'm not surprised anymore, but in my mind I was like, oh, when they were trying to find what they were going to say, I thought they would, I don't know. I don't even know, but maybe on issues that they were facing or things that they like or things that they like to do. But no, they decided to talk about Ivujivik. And I had to flew away, so I don't know the result. I'm anxious to listen to it. But that showing that even today, that sense of community, not maybe the way we define it, but it's very, very important. But there's one thing that was complicated for, so as I said, 3 languages, 300 texts, 95 authors, but what has been a struggle for that literature to be more known is the institution. Institutions were lacking at first, although Avatak has been doing tremendous work to try to have those writings, and I'm talking about only that, but they have all sorts of other projects on other fields, but they were alone, or almost alone. Outside of those magazines from funded by governments, there was not much done in terms of publication, but not only that, in terms of reception. Because the texts were not up there, not a lot of people were talking about them. And then they were not taught. And I know they were not taught here in universities until not long ago, maybe 10 years, but they haven't been taught in schools up north in Nunavik either. And that's something we have to do urgently. It should be our first focus. We need to have those texts in those classrooms as fast as possible. Because I can say that the students, when they hear about those texts, when they've been in front of the pile I gather from my place, and I come sometimes in classroom and I show them, and I see that it has an impact. And I don't want them to wait, although Nunavik Inuktitut is a wonderful program. I don't want them to have to wait in post-secondary to hear about those texts. They have to hear about them way much before. And this is the only example of what I can offer in terms of books, monography. but there's a lot more than that. And one that I've been introducing in committees about curriculum is the songs. And the songs in terms of literature are very interesting because they're, first of all, they are very popular. Yeah, they're probably the most popular text for Inuit. They know those songs. They know them by heart. They tell stories. They tell some stories from the past. They tell also fictional stories. And they are mixing an oral form of literature that were a real tradition, the pisse, and then mixing with a contemporary way of writing songs. And as I said before, it's been 10 years now that writers from Nunavik have been very prolific in writing songs in Inuktitut. And each of them have an impact on our students, on our youth, on the adults too. But on our youth, the power is incredible. So I know I have only 1 minute, so I'm just going to finish with a little bit of music. Why not? It's the end of the afternoon. And if people recognize the songs, I like to ask them to just raise a hand every time I recognize that, I already heard it. So I'm going to finish with that, and then we can have questions maybe. If it's working. The sound is not working, right? No. Non, ça c'est pas ça.
C'est en dessous, là où il y a l'icône avec le petit.
Ouais.
Voilà.
Yeah. But then you have to be sure the sound is turned
maybe
on
now it's
in
on?
the machine.
Okay, I'm gonna try. Don't put it too. Ne mets pas trop.
Là-bas.
Non.
Oui, c'est ça.
Oh no, I'm sorry, and I'm not gonna sing. No, it's too bad. Maybe from my computer? No, that would be let me try.
Yeah, try.
I'm gonna try. I'll be surprised that you can hear something, but let's try. Je sais qu'il faut qu'on arrête là. Ouais, il reste 1 minute.
Mama do.
So I stopped here because I love answering questions. So the only thing is that, so here there were two artists from Nunavik, but with the help of Avatak and the help of Sylvie and Olivia that I just met today, we had that little anthology of songs from Nunavik since 1970s to today. It's a little book, but it's only in Inuktitut, and that's okay. And so that was one of the projects last spring. So thank you, and if you have questions, we have maybe 5 minutes. Yeah. Wait, at the lounge, over there. I won't be here, at the lounge. Yeah. Oui, Malérie.
In the bag that Thomas is carrying, there's some food from Ivujivik that you could taste at the book launch.
Yeah, there's not that.
We're going there next.
Is there any questions for Nelly?
Yes.
You mentioned about 40% now of the literature is in Inuktitut. Is it any particular kind? Like, are people writing, mysteries or anything, or is it almost entirely songs?
Oh, no. There's a lot of type of text. There's a lot of autobiography, a lot of them, for some reasons that I can explain right after. A lot of history text, opinion text, and then we have some poetry, some fiction, but not a lot. So that was my point. I've come to understand that fiction, anyway, in the text I have, like those texts from 50 years, hasn't been a lot focused on fiction, and it's because I was told by elders that the word for Inuit has to be true. You don't talk about something that you don't know, or you haven't experienced, or that you haven't heard from someone who experienced it. So there's not a lot of fiction. There is, but there are a little few of them, and it's still that way. Even in the songwriting from the last few years, it's a lot of their own experiences, own stories. So no, it comes in a lot of forms. Yeah. Yes.
I'm curious, as a writer myself, was one of the criteria that it had to be a text they wanted to write, or like, for example, the songwriting class where someone was brought in and sort of managed it? Was one of your criteria that it had to be the text had to have been written of their own free will, or without sort of an outside motivating?
No, some of them were outside motivating. Sanak was totally outside motivating at first. It was a priest who came to our community and asked her to tell her stories, including as much as vocabulary she could include. Then she obviously liked it, and she started to continue the story, and it became a lot more fictional after, when she started to take on it. But a lot of them were asked to tell stories or encouraged to tell stories. So I included them too, because I'm sure that in any things like that are initiated for someone from outside, there's at some point something that's coming from the writers themselves along the project, even if it's short or long. I guess if there's no question, we're gonna go over there. Thank you.